Welcome to Speak Your Mind by Climobilize, where we're putting the spotlight on voices that are being crowded out by the mainstream. My guest for this session is Paul Harnett. Paul is a lifelong economist who has worked for the World Bank and the IMF, among other organizations. Paul is the co-founder of worldbasicincome.org, which has recently evolved into equalright.org. And Paul will explain a little more about this evolution during his talk. Hi, Paul. Thanks for being here. We're so happy to have you.
It's a lot, Brad.
In this session, Paul is going to be speaking about how to drive policy and systems change at scale while protecting individual rights from government overreach and authoritarianism. Paul, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Brad. So, yeah, we've changed our name in the last few months from World Basic Income. So, obviously, World Basic Income give everyone in the world a monthly amount of money, trying to eradicate world poverty for a start. And that's really a social justice issue. And we've always been convinced that that's possible. But we changed our name to Equal Rights because we're facing three major issues, we believe, in the world today. And that's not just social justice, but climate justice and racial justice as well. And we like to join the dots and ensure that all of those issues are addressed. So we changed from World Basic Income to equalright.org. So I'm going to talk today a little about how we would look at those issues. And the first thing that I would say is that many of our problems are international problems, and we need international solutions. And we don't really have the international infrastructure to deal with all of these problems. But we're going to put forward a proposal that maybe some people would think, oh, yeah, that's a good idea. So let's start at the beginning. What is the root problem? Many people call it capitalism. I think I would actually go further than that and say we're not living in a capitalist world anymore. It's more like a plutocracy. It's tax havens. What's that got to do with markets and capitalism? Nothing really. It's just a naked grab of money and not paying taxes. Um, a lot of the price rises recently have had nothing to do with markets. They've just been large corporations deciding to increase energy prices or food prices, etc., and we all suffer. So I'm not sure how we should define this problem, but certainly the financialization of many aspects of our lives, just the nature of money itself, there are serious problems. So, so what are the solutions? And I've been to a few conferences, and the title might be "Another World is Possible," and I've been quite excited at times to hear what solutions other people put forward. And I think a lot of the time we are very aware of what those problems are, but we don't have a particular vision for the future. So let me just put one idea out there. And our organization wouldn't say this is the solution. It'd say, think about this and, you know, hopefully with some good minds, we can refine it. So let's begin with a recently formed fund, the Loss and Damage Fund that came out of the recent COP. And many of us would agree that that Loss and Damage Fund, yeah, it's great, it's international, but it has so many shortcomings. First of all, the amount of resources that are going to be put into this fund, they're not guaranteed, it's voluntary. What else? The governance of the fund, was the World Bank going to govern it? And is that democratic? We'd like to see really good governance of any fund. Should we restrict the funds to just something like loss and damage? Well, we'd say no. And really, our solution is a solution that basically plays the system at its own game. The game is money. And there are various ways of addressing that. One is to just print a whole load more money and give everyone the world basic income in the world. Yeah, you can do that. That's not a problem. We've seen during COVID and during the banking crisis, no problem. Let's just print a whole load of money and dish it out. So we know that that's one way of doing it. But let's have a look at maybe another way as well. And that is that if we expanded it from loss and damage, and I'm not saying loss and damage isn't important, it's highly important. But one of the things that unites all of us within the environmental climate movement is that we need an immediate cap on the extraction of carbon. In Greta Thunberg's words, keep it in the ground. That's what we need. And we're part of an alliance called the Cap and Share Climate Alliance. And that's exactly what we're saying. We're saying cap the amount of extraction. Technologically, that is not a big problem. 100 companies account for 70% at least of all of the fossil fuels extracted on this planet. So if you had a mechanism to cap carbon, you could enforce it quite easily. If you cut carbon, what happens? Well, talk to the scientists, agree on the small amount of carbon that you could actually extract and sell those licenses. We've modeled that, as have others. They usually do it in terms of a carbon tax, which we don't quite agree with, but I won't go into that now. So that would actually raise trillions. That money in a global fund, that level of funding could be used to finance a Green New Deal or whatever you want to call it for the whole of this planet.
So, if Paul,
Um,
if I could interject here with a question, conceptually that sounds like a great idea, but how would you go about overseeing that and not have the same people who are choosing this direction that
yes,
we're in overseeing those funds?
I'll definitely answer that one.
Yeah.
I mean, in some respects, it doesn't matter where that fund sits. I mean, the best the best example of a fund in the world is probably the Norwegian pension fund. So Norway extracted oil from the North Sea, and luckily, and it was organized by an Iraqi immigrant to Norway, luckily the Norwegians decided not to spend it. I would argue that the UK had a similar amount of they call it revenues from North Sea oil, and they spent it all. So Norway now has a pension fund worth over 1 trillion. I wouldn't mind if those people at the top of the Norwegian pension fund actually did the technological nuts and bolts of managing such a fund. That'd be fine. But what we'd like to see in terms of ultimate governance of any such fund should be a global citizens' assembly. That's the way forward as far as we're concerned. And I know other speakers are going to talk about global citizens' assemblies. So I won't go into a huge amount of detail except to say it's already been done. It was done during the Glasgow COP. So
Well,
if you think about all of the problems of organizing such an assembly, it's already been addressed.
maybe you could elaborate a little bit on what it looks like for any listeners who aren't really familiar with that.
So it would be a random selection of 100 people internationally. You could decide yourselves on exactly how those people should be selected. The standards, the standard issues would be 50% men, 50% women. You could represent the age groups of the world in there as well. You could represent the ethnicities of the world in there. You could represent the wealth of people in the world. So if the 1% could have one person, one person at that global citizens assembly, and of course, if there were 10% of the world who were living in extreme poverty, then 10 people would actually um, represent those people who were living in extreme poverty. So that there are various ways of doing that. You can represent people with disabilities as well. You can the list goes on. And it's been successfully tried out in countries like Ireland to inform the policies of the Irish government. There are plenty of examples all over the world that sensible decisions are reached constantly. And what I'm going to talk about today leaves a lot of questions hanging. And if the Global Citizens Assembly was to decide, oh yeah, what are we going to do with this fund? How much should we put towards um, investing in a Green New Deal? Maybe we should invest in universal public services as well, or etc. etc. They could decide all of these questions. So there you have it, Brad.
But wouldn't that cause people in the more wealthy, developed world who have so much influence to feel threatened that they're not getting representation and some world leader I'm not voting for necessarily is now going to tell me what I can and can't do. Um, I see a lot of resistance from an idea as pure a, a global body telling us what to do.
I think you would get a lot of resistance, and the truth of the matter is that all of the advances that the working people of the world, the ordinary people of the world have had throughout history, they've had to struggle for. And you really do need a mass movement to to get these ideas in place. The problem that we have at the moment is that we spend a lot of our time in social movements struggling against what's being done to us and not for a future that we actually want. And so what I'm trying to do here is to actually say, look, here's a potential future. Why don't we struggle for that? Um, and I think a lot of the examples that I'm giving of how this fund might work are coming out of real life examples. I mean, one thing that's been talked about a lot in recent years in politics is in intergenerational equity. I mean, our job is to leave this planet as good as, if not better, for our future generations. We're just not doing that. And there's a reason for that, because we are just extracting and extracting all of the time and not leaving any of the benefits of that extraction for our future generations. And I mentioned Norway before. They have. They've kept all of their money for future generations.
So before we started, we were talking about a universal basic income, which is a an aspect of change that needs to be discussed because people who don't feel comfortable or safe in their economic world and reality are going to resist any type of change unless they know that they can continue to live in their home and pay for their food and clothing and whatnot. So how does a universal basic income play into these ideas, which may be a little unsettling for people?
Well, I think there's one sentence that sums it up for me, and a universal basic income gives everybody on this planet the right to say no. No to an exploitative employer. No to in David Graeber's words, a bullshit job. And really, that sums it all up for me. That you are money is power. If you are given enough money to survive, you have the power to do what you want to do. Okay,
Interesting.
so
I've I've never heard it expressed so succinctly. The power to say no, and that's beautiful. It's most people don't have the power to say no in their
mm,
world, even people who are really well off.
mm,
And I know many great people, good people who work in sustainability who can't say no to the corporation because that corporation facilitates their lifestyle. So they work with the corporation and they water down what's necessary. Um, but the power to say no is a powerful concept. We're coming towards the end, and what I'd like is there any final thoughts or ideas that you'd like to leave the listeners with about the risks of authoritarianism, descending on us if we give too much power to a particular group who tells us that they're going to do the best for us, but we've seen governments, most of them will grab that power and do pretty crazy stuff. So, how do you control the power that we give to these decision makers? The citizen assembly is one aspect of it, but you live in this world, and maybe you can just shed some light on that.
well, I think security. Fascism arises out of a lack of security a lot of the time. And it's always in the 1% or even 10%'s interest to ensure that the blame does not lie at their door. It actually lies at the door of immigrants or they other people all of the time. And I think if everybody in the world had a basic level of security, and I'm certainly not against universal basic services. I think they go hand in hand with the universal basic income, to be honest. If you had those levels of security for everyone in the world, there'd be nowhere to go for fascism. You know,
People,
you would foster a sense of cooperation. A lot of
yeah,
people would prefer not to do paid work. They'd like to do voluntary work within their community. You know, they'd like
yeah,
to look after their elderly relatives. It doesn't really matter what you do, but and we have enough money to do this. We have enough resources to do this. That's,
yeah.
but we're never
It's
told that. We're never told that. And I've only explained one bit of what should belong to all of us, and that's fossil fuels. I could go on about all the fish in the sea. I could go on about um, data. We've given the corporations our data. Surely we should get some money for that. I could go on about all kinds of things.
right,
What I could go on about wealth tax. Why don't we tax the billionaires and throw that into our sovereign wealth fund as well? But
right,
let's expand on it. Maybe if some of the viewers want to ask questions later or something like that. There's
right.
a lot to expand upon here.
Well, I think you've opened up some amazing ideas, and we'd love to have you back at a future event. Um, it's inspiring to hear a different worldview. We are stuck in a worldview of consumption and scarcity. I mean, that's where capitalism thrives. And we don't have to have scarcity. And that's a mindset that we need to challenge. Um, so it's doable, but it is a huge challenge, and we need so many different people trying to, bring us forward. Um, Thank you so much for being with us. My hope is that we're starting a new year, and you and I and the other speakers and the other people who are like-minded can work together to solve these challenges that we face in 2024 and beyond. So, thanks so much for being here, Paul.
And thank you, Brad, for having me. It's been a pleasure.